When we first breached the upper spires of Hive, there were no bones, only flesh without skeletons, draped and strung like wet banners across the walls of the manufactorum. Limbs sagged in coils of meat, torsos collapsed in on themselves as if hollowed out, yet every auspex and medical instrument insisted the tissue remained biologically viable. That was the first impossibility I recorded in this report, and I set it down with the knowledge that the Ordo will either classify these words to dust or use them as grounds for immediate purgation. I, interrogator, Malik Vane, carried the writ of the Inquisition when we descended into silence. I write now because silence was not absence, silence was consumption. The Valkyrie had cut through smog and ash for hours before we made final approach. Hive Veros rose from the wastes like a blade thrust into black soil. Tier after tier of rusted spires and hab blocks once teeming with billions. Vox traffic should have deafened us. Manufactoria sirens. Arbeits patrols. Dock workers calling out shifts. Instead, the only sound was the turbulence hammering the hull and the occasional low groan from the hive itself, as if the city were exhaling. My retinue numbered 7. 2 stormtroopers of the Scions, a Mechanicus, adept, whose Binharik had not stopped flickering since we departed orbit. 1 Churgeon, 1 sanctioned psyker, my acolyte Karen, and myself. Our orders were simple: verify contamination, cleanse if possible, erase if necessary. We touched down on the landing platforms of the upper manufactorum. Metal, underfoot, trembled, not from impact, but from some deep-seated vibration, resonating through the hive. The stormtroopers swept with precision, clearing doorways in wedge formation, barrels steady. The psyker whispered constantly, muttering litanies of warding. I did not reprimand him. Even a sanctioned soul knew the stink of the warp when it pressed close. The Mechanicus adept interfaced with the first Vox relay we encountered, static, then layered beneath it, a cadence of syllables like children, learning their catechism, 9 phrases repeated 33 times before distortion broke the loop, numbers without meaning, yet already etched themselves into my notes. It was then that Auspex returned its first anomaly. 1 heartbeat, singular, steady, 20 meters within the grand cathedral of the Manufactorum Saints. The cathedral should have housed thousands at all hours, but Vox confirmed no life signatures apart from that 1 pulse. Karen adjusted the Auspex, struck it against her palm, recalibrated, still, 1 beat, impossibly slow, impossibly deep. We entered formation, stormtroopers front, psyker and churgeon behind, adept streaming his cant. I recited the catechism of entry, each word heavy in the rebreather. The doors to the cathedral resisted for only a moment before groaning open. The air inside was moist, humid in a way hives never were, condensation dripping from iron vaulting high overhead. Light caught on surfaces that seemed too pale. At first I thought them cloaked statues of saints. Then one moved. They were not statues, not relics. They were citizens of the hive, hundreds, perhaps thousands, kneeling in rows upon the floor. Their clothing was intact, their flesh intact, but no bones supported them. Their bodies folded and sagged, faces slumped forward, eyes open yet unblinking. None of them breathed, none of them stirred, and yet Auspex insisted. Vital signs present, life functions stable. The psyker gagged into his helm, muttering that the warp was inside the marrowless. He was wrong. There was no marrow. I saw it with my own eyes. I ordered the Mechanicus adept to scan. His litany stuttered as he linked his mechadendrites to the Auspex. The machine shrieked. A burst of Binharik fractured into liturgical chant. Not his voice, but hundreds, singing in cadence. The words were not of the Emperor. They spoke instead of an ossific king. We advanced further. One of the kneelers, a woman judging by the remnants of her manufactorum smock, collapsed sideways. her body deflated, sagging flat upon the tiles like a sack of bloodied cloth. No skeleton to support her. The stormtrooper raised his weapon. I held my hand. No threat was visible. But then it came. Movement. A man at the front of the line turned his head. That a natural turn. His scullless neck swiveled full half-circle. Folds of flesh creasing where vertebrae should have resisted. He stared at me with unclouded eyes, his lips splitting into a smile too wide for his unsupported jaw. When he spoke, the voice that emerged was not his own. It was the voice of a child, high and clear, echoing through the nave with impossible resonance. He is beneath, the figure said. He waits for marrow. And then every heartbeat in the chamber began to sound at once. The sound of heartbeats filled the cathedral like drums beneath the earth, layered in a rhythmic, yet unified in pressure. Each kneeling figure thudded with pulse despite their stillness. The psyker clutched his temples, bleeding from the nose, muttering that he could see the rhythm moving like light beneath their skin. I ordered silence, though the command felt hollow. The chamber was already saturated with silence, broken only by the pounding inside flesh. The child's voice from the boneless man lingered, not echoed through walls but through marrow I no longer trusted. The stormtroopers adjusted stances, muzzles sweeping. One of them muttered a prayer over his comm bead, thinking it private. In the nave's dim glow, the citizens' eyes glistened. Every pair turned to us, not blinking, not moving, just watching, the weight of 1,000 unbroken gazes pressing. The Mechanicus, adept, continued his Benheric cant, though it faltered, descending into stuttering bursts. He snapped back, Voxcaster on his shoulder blaring corrupted hymnals, fragments of Imperial liturgy rearranged, Ossificus Rex, marrow eternal, tithe complete, each phrase repeated. Building into feedback, I stepped forward, testing the distance. The kneelers shifted, almost imperceptibly, sagging flesh dragging against stone. The air thickened with humidity, condensation dripping from their bodies, though none breathed. I tried Vox contact with orbit, only static. The adept rewired, sparks leaping from his mechadendrites. But the return signal carried screams pitched impossibly low, vibrating through armor plates. The psyker began reciting counter litanies, each syllable fractured by stammers. He claimed the heartbeats did not belong to the flesh we saw, that each body was only a vessel, a speaker for something buried deeper. One of the kneelers twitched violently, collapsing face first into the floor. When the chirurgeon turned him over, his jaw sagged open, no teeth, no bone. The tongue writhed like a serpent, coiling and stiffening, then splitting at the tip. He whispered in the same child's voice, 9 will fall, 33 shall sing. I marked it. Another repetition of numbers. Pattern, not random. Chiron recorded with Auspex. Lenses focusing. Data scrawls across her screen showed waves of resonance building. Not sound, but pressure, converging toward the cathedral's altar. The altar itself cracked down the middle. From within came not light, but heat, a damp exhalation carrying the stench of marrow boiled alive. Beneath the slabs lay a hollow cavity, lined not with relics, but with pale cords of stripped sinew. The psyker fell to his knees, shrieking that they were singing absence. I felt it too, in absence that weighed as much as matter, like gravity inverted. The kneelers leaned, as one toward the altar, bodies sagging, arms outstretched. The stormtroopers raised weapons on my order and opened fire. Lost bolts seared flesh, but no screams rose. The bodies shuddered only slightly before sagging back into stillness, wounds closing as if filled with wet plaster. The adept shouted, his vox carrying distortion, that the Auspex heartbeat had split from 1 to dozens to hundreds. He couldn't trace origin. Every citizen registered alive, yet the signals overlapped, as if sharing one circulatory system. The Chirurgeon dropped his tools, pale, whispering that anatomy no longer applied. A noise built behind us. I turned. At the great entrance doors, the flesh of the fallen woman, the first kneeler we'd seen collapse, was dragging itself across the tiles. Without bone, it slithered like a sack of worms, pulling toward the altar, more joined. Collapsed citizens flowing like liquid muscle, merging, pooling in the crack of the altar. Their whispers joined into chorus, still in the child's voice, hundreds speaking as one. He waits beneath. He waits for marrow. The psychers screamed and pointed upward. I looked to the vaulted ceiling. Carved saints of the manufactorum loomed in frozen prayer, but their faces were gone. Where stone visages had been, now there were only smooth hollows, as though chiseled clean by invisible hand. Stone dust fell like ash. The cathedral itself was being stripped of its bones. We fell back toward the nave, weapons braced, formation breaking under the impossible. My vox clicked once with a signal not ours. A single phrase, forced through every channel at once. Marrow tithe incomplete. The altar split wide, collapsing inward with a sound like a rib cage cracking. From the cavity, a vibration roared, shaking the entire manufactorum. All around us, boneless citizens rose to their feet, bodies sagging, necks bending in unnatural arcs. They spoke in unison, child voices breaking into static. Beneath, and the heartbeat we'd followed into this cathedral grew louder, multiplied, now beating from the floor itself. We retreated from the cathedral, with weapons raised, the thudding of the Hive's false heartbeat chasing us through the manufactorum spires. The Mechanicus, adept, streamed Benheric cant, voice splintered by static, warning that resonance was growing stronger. The deeper we moved, every step downward felt less like descent and more like entering a lung, as if the Hive itself inhaled us. Moisture clung to armor seals, breathing through the rebreather, tasted of copper and rot. The upper avenues were abandoned, yet signs of movement were everywhere. Doors stood open with hinges bent. Voxcasters left active, broadcasting distorted hymns. The stormtroopers checked each corner, barrels tight to wall, every shadow suspect. We found remnants of servitors wandering without purpose. Their frames were intact, but the structures meant to anchor them, ribs, skull plates, arm bones, had been hollowed clean. Still they moved, guided by instructions blaring from vox speakers grafted into their flesh. The tithe of marrow must be met, the phrase repeated, each time in a different tone, as if voices were borrowed. Karen logged Auspex readings, each pulse distorted by interference. Life signs appeared and vanished, often too many in one location, then none at all. At one juncture, she reported thousands of heartbeats clustered in a single corridor. When we advanced, the hall was empty. Only trails of organic residue glistened across the floor, pale strands of tissue leading downward. The psyker pressed his palm to the wall, withdrawing instantly, muttering that the steel itself had taste. He would not explain further. We pushed deeper, guided by the Mechanicus Adept's calculations. The underhive loomed, tunnels tight with condensation. Entire walls seemed slick, as if coated in living secretion. Lights flickered, throwing glimmers across the damp. In one chamber, the Chirurgeon stopped us to examine markings etched into the rust. They were grooves, symmetrical, spiraling. At first random, then repeated, 9 grooves, 33 turns. The same pattern from the cathedral, now inscribed on metal by some unseen hand. The stormtroopers tightened formation. Sweat pooled beneath armor as temperature rose. Ahead, a lift shaft yawned, its doors forced open. We looked down. Instead of air or steel, the shaft was filled to its limit. with organic matter, a packed column of pulped flesh pressed into vertical confinement. Veins pulsed across the surface, glowing faintly with internal rhythm. The auspex registered not one, but hundreds of heartbeats beating in unison within the column. The psyker gagged, eyes rolling white, insisting the mass was breathing. The Mechanicus Adept deployed a servo skull, its optics descending into the shaft. Visuals streamed back, muscle fibers winding, twitching as if aware. Fragments of bone floated within, but each fragment twisted violently before dissolving into pulp. The skull cut its feed midstream, its final recording a child's whisper in pure Benheric. "We keep the marrow, we feed him." I ordered immediate withdrawal from the shaft. We turned into adjoining corridors, where voxcasters hummed louder. Abandoned guard stations stood in half ruin, lost rifles stacked against walls, flak armor left folded. Yet there were no bodies. The psyker suggested they had marched willingly. Bones offered. The stormtroopers dismissed it as madness, but unease grew with each step. One corridor ended in a guard command post. Its vox was still active, speakers vibrating. We played the transmission. A man's voice, cracked with panic, confessed to ordering his men into the ossuary below. He begged forgiveness, repeating that the tithe had to be completed, that the king demanded structure. His voice broke into screams, then silence, cut by the sound of ribs snapping like kindling. The chamber around us trembled. From the walls came faint shudders, not mechanical but organic. My acolyte gasped as condensation ran red, droplets streaking with diluted blood. The psyker wailed, covering his ears. He claimed the hive itself was listening, repeating our movements like echoes in marrow. We pressed on despite the dread, knowing command required proof. The tunnels constricted, light dimming, air thick. At last, a vast doorway loomed ahead, sealed with crude chains forged from fused femurs and tibias. The Mechanicus Adept scanned. Beyond the door, the auspex pulsed violently. Not one heartbeat now, but thousands, overlapping, vibrating like a choir. We stood at the threshold of something vast. The psyker whispered that the bones themselves were singing. I touched the seal. The chains thrummed faintly, vibrating with rhythm. Then the door shuddered, once, as if something enormous had exhaled behind it. We broke the seal of the bone chain door with melta-charges, the thunder of ignition muffled, as if the hive itself swallowed sound. Smoke cleared to reveal a chamber, vast and circular, the air wet and thick enough to cling to vox grills. My rebreather labored with each breath, filters clogging from condensation that smelled not of rust, but marrow broth. The stormtroopers advanced first, their boots sloshing in shallow pools, spread across the floor. At first glance, I thought the walls lined with carved pillars. Then one of the pillars quivered. They were not stone. They were towers of fused flesh, stacked upon itself in obscene architecture, stretched into columns that touched the vaulted ceiling, and from them emanated a hum. Not audible at first, but felt. A pressure in bone, a vibration through teeth. The Mechanicus Adept raised auspex to record. The reading came back as harmonic resonance, frequencies aligning in intervals too precise to be chance. The psyker doubled over, blood trickling from his ears, shrieking that the song was hollowing him from inside. One of the stormtroopers fell next, his laskin clattering as he screamed. His armor shifted strangely, plates sinking inward, his body convulsed. When I reached him, I saw the impossible. His skeleton was crumbling to dust within his flesh. He collapsed, his frame folding in on itself. Screams strangled as his throat lost structure. We pulled back, weapons raised, but the resonance did not relent. Every pillar thrummed, each in counterpoint, a choir of absence singing. The Mechanicus Adept described it as mathematical invocations. He claimed the resonance was not sound, but instruction, rewriting the laws that bound calcium, marrow, ligament. He attempted to jam the frequency with counter-signal, his mechadendrites sparking, vox chattering and fractured binheric. The attempt failed. The pillars only grew louder, the rhythm aligning with the heartbeat we had followed since arrival. The psyker pressed both palms to the ground and wailed that the walls themselves were bone disguised as steel, that the entire chamber was a ribcage inverted. I silenced him, though inwardly I felt the truth of his words. The floor trembled with each pulse, dust raining from above. Karen scanned the chamber's perimeter, her auspex locked onto something embedded at its core. Thousands of skeletal fragments arranged into concentric circles, femurs laid in spirals, skulls stacked in lattices, rib cages intertwined into shapes beyond human geometry, all vibrating in unison. When the chirurgeon approached, he whispered prayers in disbelief. He said the arrangement mimicked the structures of the human ear, enlarged to cathedral scale. An ear made of bones, listening, feeding, amplifying. He insisted no natural process could replicate this with such precision. The mechanicus, adept, disagreed. It was not natural, but it was perfect. Perfection meant design. Design meant intent. We pressed further into the chamber. Each step rattled teeth. Each hum gnawed at spine. I recited litanies of warding to anchor myself. The psyker clutched his head, sobbing that voices were joining the resonance. I listened carefully. Beneath the hum, words began to form. They were prayers, imperial hymns, rearranged, stripped of devotion, bent into praise for something nameless. I caught one phrase distinctly. Ossific King, marrow eternal, tithe complete. The stormtroopers set explosives, desperate to silence the choir. I allowed it, though doubt gnawed at me. If resonance could collapse, bone, what would detonation achieve? Still, they planted charges along the nearest pillars. The adept warned each strike of defiance might only feed the pattern, but he obeyed. As the last charge was set, my vox crackled. Not static, not chant. A voice, human, male, strained with confession. It was the voice of a guard officer. His words looped, recorded long ago, yet still bleeding through vox ether. Forgive me, he begged. Forgive me. I led them down. I ordered the march into the ossuary below. It was the only way. He asked for tithe. I gave him men. Please, Emperor, forgive me. His voice broke into screams, then wet crunches. The transmission cut, but the resonance filled the absence immediately. Louder, jubilant, as if nourished by confession. The psyker collapsed unconscious, his body trembling. The stormtroopers steadied weapons, nerves shattered. I marked the officer's words. Ossuary. Below, we had not yet reached the source. This chamber, for all its horror, was only a threshold. As the charges counted down, the pillars trembled, leaning toward us, their hum intensifying to shriek. Then the lights died, every lumen extinguished. In the pitch dark, the choir continued to sing, and beneath the resonance, deeper still, I heard something vast stirring, as if answering the hymn. The charges detonated in pitch dark, fire and pressure slamming through the chamber. Pillars of flesh ruptured outward, spraying fragments across the walls. For a moment, the resonance ceased, replaced by ringing silence. Then the echoes returned, not weaker but multiplied, reverberating through the steel bones of the hive itself. My rebreather filters filled with smoke and gore. The stormtroopers regrouped, dragging the unconscious psyker. The mechanicus adept rasped binheric. His voice cracked, warning the chamber was only one organ in a greater system. We pressed forward, through a fracture, torn open by the blast. The tunnel sloped downward, steep and irregular, lined, not with steel, but ossified remains. The deeper we walked, the more deliberate the arrangement became. Bones formed arches overhead, ribs bent into bridges, skulls mortared into walls. They were not scattered corpses. They were placed orderly, precise, ritualistic. The chirurgeon traced his hand across a spiral pattern, counting silently, 9 segments, 33 turns. The pattern again, repeating in geometry beyond chance. The air thickened, heavy with dust that was not dust, but powdered calcium. Our boots crunched softly, every step stirring clouds of white that clung to lenses and armor. Auspex flickered constantly, unable to fix on life signs. Instead, it pulsed with rhythmic distortion, as though the device itself had grown a heartbeat. We reached the first of the ossuaries. A vaulted hall stretched before us, lit faintly by bioluminescent marrow seeping from cracks between stacked bones. At its center lay a spiral of femurs arranged like the teeth of some colossal gear. The stormtroopers raised weapons, but there was no enemy, only structure, humming faintly. The Mechanicus Adept approached, mechadendrites, quivering, whispering Binheric reverence. He claimed the bones resonated with perfect mathematical intervals, frequencies that aligned with patterns known only in starship engines. His words turned reverent. This is not decay. This is design, invocation carved in matter. Karen disagreed. She recited liturgies of purity, her auspex recording while she shook with fear. To her, the spiral was no machine, but blasphemy. A psalm written in marrow. The chirurgeon whispered the same, naming it Bone Psalms, hymns to a power unnamed in any sanctioned scripture. We moved further. Every wall bore patterns, rib cages intertwined into lattices, pelvises aligned like altars. The arrangement was purposeful, too deliberate to be random scavenging. This was worship. This was sacrifice given form. The psyker regained consciousness, eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse. He told us the bones were not dead. He could feel their memories. Lives bled into the marrow. Still whispering, he clutched his head and screamed when he touched one, collapsing again. I ordered him restrained. His cries lingered, echoing the numbers. 9 and 33. 9 and 33. At the far end of the ossuary stood a great archway, constructed entirely of vertebrae fused into spirals. Beneath it, kneeling in silent prayer, was a man, not one of my retinue, nor a servitor, a preacher, his robes still marked with symbols of the ecclesiarchy. He looked up as we entered. His face was gaunt, pallid. His eyes gleamed with zeal. The stormtroopers leveled weapons. I demanded identification. He laughed, a dry crackling sound. Then he rose. His movements were fluid, too fluid. As he stood, I realized his back was broken, or rather absent. He had no spine. His torso sagged yet remained upright, flesh unsupported where vertebrae should have been. There was only a hollow, and still he moved, steady, balanced by some unseen force. The preacher spread his arms, voice carrying like liturgy. Welcome to the ossuary below. You come as witness to the tithe fulfilled. The king has been fed. I demanded to know his master. He spoke the words without hesitation. The ossific king, lord of marrow, harvester of structure, the god who builds eternal from the tithe of bone. Behind him, the spiral of femurs began to vibrate, rising in pitch. The bioluminescence brightened, throwing his shadow long across the ossuary. He turned to face it, kneeling once more. Join us, he whispered, for he waits beneath. And the bones in the walls began to shift, rattling faintly, as if answering his prayer. The preacher knelt before the spiral of femurs, his body swaying with unnatural grace. His torso sagged in impossible ways, flesh folding where spine should have held structure. Yet he stood unbroken, balance maintained by some unseen order. The The stormtroopers circled him, weapons raised. But I signaled restraint. Something about his presence demanded listening. Even as every nerve warned against it, his voice carried without effort, soft yet echoing through the ossuary. The tithe of marrow grants eternity. I have given mine, and in return, he sustains me. Karen whispered that the man was an abomination, demanding execution. But the Mechanicus adept interjected, voice reverent, suggesting restraint. He argued the preacher represented living proof of structural transcendence, flesh animated without bone. To the adept, this was perfection beyond biology, a design worth studying. The psyker moaned in his restraints, shrieking that the man's voice carried echoes from the warp, layered with countless children's tones beneath the words. I stepped forward, demanding answers. Who was this Ossific king? Was it Daemon, Xymnos, or Hertech Engine? The preacher shook his head, his neck folding grotesquely. Not Daemon, not alien. He is the true god of structure. The emperor grants flesh, but flesh rots. My king grants framework eternal. I gave him my spine, and he raised me higher than mortality. The stormtroopers pressed muzzles to his chest, but he only smiled, serene, his body yielding like dough around the barrels. His devotion unnerved even the hardened scions. He gestured toward the spirals of bone, where resonance pulsed faintly. The nobles of this hive were first. They offered their marrow willingly, and in exchange he gifted them dominion. Their bones are the choir, their flesh still rules. We exchanged wary glances. The Mechanicus adept demanded to see the source, driven by obsession. The preacher rose without protest, nodding as though our intrusion was expected. Come then, follow. You will see his geometry. You will hear his song. We advanced deeper, trailing him through corridors lined with bones, fused into deliberate patterns. The psyker writhed, whispering numbers, repeating 9 and 33 like prayer. The chirurgeon kept notes feverishly, muttering that no anatomy could survive without skeletal frame. Yet the preacher walked fluidly, swaying like a serpent, his robe swishing across powdered calcium dust. At intervals, he paused to demonstrate his devotion. Once, he reached into his throat and retched violently. From his mouth spilled fragments of bone, shards gleaming wet in lumen glow. They fell to the floor, clicking together with uncanny intent, until they formed a crude sigil. The Mechanicus adept froze, recognizing the design warp glyphs, forbidden by inquisitorial decree. He whispered in awe, Ben Herrick voice trembling. This is function born of bone. The stormtroopers recoiled, weapons steady, demanding permission to fire. I held them back. If we executed him now, we risked losing our guide and answers. The preacher wiped blood from his lips, smiling faintly. Even without spine, I carry his mark. He shapes through me. As we pressed further, humidity thickened. Walls dripped with condensation that glistened like marrow fluid. The air thrummed with a constant undertone, not vibration now, but melody. The hymn of the Ossific King echoed faintly ahead, thousands of voices layered, each childlike, each reciting fragments of liturgy bent into praise of bone. The preacher stopped suddenly, placing his hands upon a sealed archway of vertebrae. His voice dropped into reverence. Beyond this gate lie the thrones of 33. You will see the covenant. You will understand why no bone may rest unclaimed. The vertebrae shuddered under his touch, splitting slightly. A draft of warm, fetid air escaped, thick with the stench of marrow-rotted sweet. The psyker screamed, convulsing, shouting that the thrones were still alive. The preacher turned back to us, eyes wide with fervor, his hollow torso swaying. Come then, servants of the false throne, bear witness to the Ossific King's covenant. And with that, the vertebrae gate creaked open, resonating like ribs cracking under immense pressure. The vertebrae parted with a groan, like ribs splitting under strain, unveiling a chamber vast and suffocating. The air rushed past us, heavy and moist, thick with the cloying stench of marrow. The lumen glow revealed an amphitheater of bone, concentric tiers rising upward, each throne carved from fused skeletons, 33 in total, arranged in perfect spiral alignment, facing inward toward a pit at the center. Figures sat upon those thrones, not statues, not corpses, yet not alive in any human sense. Their bodies were skeletal frameworks adorned with shreds of dried flesh, robes in tatters, yet they moved. Fingers twitched in unison, jaws clacked faintly, and their sockets glowed with pale lumen. The preacher fell to his knees, arms raised. The 33 nobles, their tithe complete, their dominion eternal. The psyker shrieked, thrashing against restraints, veins bulging, his voice fractured, as if layered with many others. They're singing. Can't you hear it? Every bone hums with them. They are the choir of the king. His eyes rolled back, and his body spazzed violently, emitting a wet crack as though his own skeleton strained to escape his flesh. I ordered the chirurgeon to sedate him, but the medic shook, whispering that the readings showed impossible activity. The psyker's bones vibrated against muscle, straining as though aligning with some unseen rhythm. The mechanicus adept approached the nearest throne, mechadendrites trembling. He scanned the skeletal noble, then halted. His benheric burst was almost reverent. They are connected, not by sinew, not by wire. The marrow itself is conduit. Each throne a node, each noble a vessel. This is network beyond any mechanicum array. The noble's jaws clicked in perfect sequence, like teeth grinding in prayer. The sound reverberated across the chamber, sinking into my skull. The stormtroopers steadied weapons, muttering litanies, fingers trembling on triggers. Karen recited the litany of purity, under her breath, voice unsteady. Then the central pit stirred. From its depths rose a column of bone, spiraled and jagged, fused from countless skeletons. It pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, each throb in sync with the noble's clicks. The column stretched toward the ceiling like a spire, and from its surface protruded half-formed skulls, jaws chattering silently. The preacher prostrated himself fully. The ossific king hears you. His choir welcomes witness. Offer tithe, and structure eternal shall be yours. The stormtroopers demanded we retreat. Fear cut through their discipline, but the adept insisted otherwise. His benheric voice rising in zeal. We must study. This is no warp phantom. This is function, perfection in ossuary form. The psyker convulsed again, shrieking until blood burst from his nose. His voice carried two tones, his own and another beneath it, guttural and resonant. He's calling. He wants my spine. The words came not from his lips, but from the vibration of his ribcage, rattling with every syllable. The column of bone bent unnaturally, angling toward us, skulls embedded within its surface, twisted, their sockets fixing on our group. Their jaws opened in unison, releasing not sound but vibration. The marrow in the walls vibrated in answer. My teeth ached, my bones trembled within their sockets, and I felt the resonance creeping inward. One of the stormtroopers screamed, collapsing, his armor buckled inward, his body spasming. With a wet crack, his ribs tore free from his flesh, breaking through his chest plate. They coiled outward like serpents, aligning with the spiral pattern in the floor. His shrieks cut short as his spine detached, slithering from his back in one grotesque motion. The others opened fire in panic. Bolter rounds shattered bone fragments. But the nobles did not fall. Their thrones absorbed the damage, marrow knitting fractures instantly. The preacher's voice cut through the chaos, ecstatic. See how he claims his tithe. You cannot kill what is already transcended. The psyker screamed again, louder than the gunfire, eyes burning with unnatural light. He's inside me. He's inside all of us. And as the stormtroopers fired, the bone column shuddered, splitting open like a maw of ribs. Something within stirred, eager to emerge. The chamber trembled as the bone column, at its center, began to awaken, rising taller, twisting upon itself, in slow, deliberate rotation. Each rib, each fused vertebra, aligned with the 33 thrones, as if guided by unseen hands. The air thickened, sticky and humid, smelling of boiled marrow and damp flesh. My rebreather filtered desperately, but the stench penetrated anyway, a tangible weight pressing down on chest and mind. The stormtroopers stiffened, weapons shaking, while Karen's auspex flickered violently, unable to stabilize readings of the central structure. The preacher fell forward, lips quivering in ecstatic reverence. He rises, he whispered. The ossific king takes form. His choir completes the circle. The marrow flows eternal. The columns of flesh along the chamber walls throbbed in response, emitting vibrations through metal and bone alike. The psyker screamed again, body convulsing, as though attempting to escape some invisible grip. Each heartbeat he registered now was magnified, overlapping, distorted, 1,000 pulses in unison, pounding through the chamber. The mechanicus, adept, raised his mechadendrites, attempting to interface with the resonance. Sparks flew as instruments overloaded. The Benharik ran wild across his Vox stream. "It is a machine of marrow," he gasped, awe-stricken. "It learns. It grows. It obeys laws beyond comprehension." His voice was swallowed by a surge of vibration. The chamber shook violently, tiles cracking beneath us. From the base of the column, a lattice of bone stretched outward, reaching the floor in spidery arcs. Skulls embedded in the lattice rotated unnaturally, facing each of us, jaws clattering. The stormtroopers opened fire, but bolter rounds shattered only flesh, not the woven bone. The nobles on their thrones stirred, heads bobbing, jaw clicks rising in rhythm with the column. The resonance crawled up my spine, vibrating marrow against muscle, shaking teeth loose in their sockets. The preacher gestured, voice lifted in liturgical cadence. "Observe the harmony. Each marrow contributes. Each offering perfects the form." He reached into his chest, hands disappearing briefly beneath tattered robes. When he withdrew, shards of bone clutched in trembling fingers, aligned in geometric pattern on the floor. The pattern pulsed with light, glowing faintly as though lit by an inner sun. Karen recoiled, eyes wide. "It's rewriting biological law," she whispered, voice trembling. "Muscle, bone, sinew. Nothing remains bound to the old rule." The Churgeon confirmed the impossibility. Auspex readings showed tissue alive without skeletal support, blood circulating without defined vascular structure. It was not decay, it was transformation, guided by some overarching intelligence. The column's pulse increased, rising into a deafening resonance. The bones of the floor and walls vibrated in response, shaking loose fragments into the air. Dust and fine marrow powder swirled like snow in a storm. The stormtroopers fell back, faces pale behind helmets, breathing erratic. One screamed as his armor distorted, the plates bending inward as though attracted by the marrow lattice. Suddenly, from within the base of the column, a sound emerged. Not a scream, not a chant, but an immense resonant pulse, low and guttural. The column bent forward, a jagged maw of ribs opening like jaws. The preacher's voice rose in ecstatic worship. He claims form. He claims shape. The ossific king awakens fully. The psyker writhed violently. Veins raised and visible beneath his skin. Blood pooled at his feet. his voice layered with others, as he bellowed, "He's inside me. He's inside all of us. He wants marrow. He wants structure." His body shuddered, and then, with a wet snapping sound, a thin spire of bone erupted from his back, curling toward the lattice. He collapsed, unconscious, but the connection remained. The marrow pulse continued. I took a step back, heart pounding, realizing fully the scale of what we faced. This was no singular monstrosity. It was Hive, ritual, machine, and God, all at once. The ossific king was alive, and the chamber itself had become an organ of his body. The preacher smiled, breathless with awe. "Soon," he whispered, "all marrow shall bow. All flesh will obey structure eternal." The column pulsed again, stronger now, shaking the very ground beneath us, as though preparing to rise entirely from the pit at the chamber's center. We had no choice but to attempt interference. The column of bone pulsed at the chamber's center, each beat resonating through our bones, making teeth rattle and stomachs churn. The Mechanicus adept insisted that only a controlled disruption of the lattice might halt its formation temporarily. He deployed servo skulls carrying destabilization charges along the floor, careful to avoid the pillars of flesh that lined the chamber walls. Every step toward placement felt like walking through thick syrup, weighted by the oppressive hum that reverberated through the marrow of our skeletons. I gave orders to the stormtroopers: cover the perimeter, maintain line of sight, prevent interference by the preacher or any animated nobles. The preacher, however, did not flee. He knelt beside the column, chanting in low, harmonious voice. Each syllable seemed to accelerate the pulse of bone. The vibrations, now deep enough to make the floor shudder beneath us. "Every act of defiance feeds him," he whispered, eyes alight with fanatic reverence. I realized that even our attempt at sabotage was anticipated, woven into some grander scheme of marrow and resonance. The psyker thrashed violently against restraints, screaming layered voices in tandem, his own guttural undertones and high-pitched childlike tones. He knows. He consumes defiance. His body convulsed as thin spires of bone erupted from his flesh, curling upward like brittle branches. The Mechanicus adept reached forward to stabilize him with mechadendrites. But even his reinforced metal appendages buckled, the spires puncturing and fusing to the machinery. Sparks erupted, a brief flash illuminating the chamber. We set the first charge beneath a ribbed lattice. The hiss of Melta igniting was drowned by the thrumming of the ossuary itself. I flinched as the column pulsed in response, brighter, louder, as if awakened further. The stormtroopers opened fire on the nearest nobles, but their projectiles splintered harmlessly against fused bone. The preacher's chanting rose in pitch, joining the resonance, reinforcing it. Perfect structure demands perfect tithe. Let all marrow be aligned. Karen's auspex flickered violently, readings surging beyond comprehension. The lattice of bone on the floor had begun to respond, moving, adjusting, aligning itself to the pulse of the column. The psyker screamed again, an inhuman sound that merged with the resonance. "It is rewriting me, my bones, my blood. It obeys only him." His body convulsed as if trying to expel the invisible hand within him. We activated the second charge. Detonation rattled the chamber, throwing us to the floor. Smoke and dust filled the air, burning eyes and nostrils. The lattice twisted, but rather than collapsing, it reformed. The column at the center pulsing even stronger. Shards of bone detached from the walls and floor, floating briefly, as if suspended by gravity's absence, then snapping into place in new, precise arrangements. The preacher smiled, arms raised, chanting louder. Every strike strengthens, every blow perfects the structure. The psyker shrieked, voice layered and overlapping, barely recognizable as human. Veins bulged across his body, skin stretched tight over trembling muscle, eyes white and wide. Thin bone spires erupted violently from his back, wrapping around his limbs and torso. The Mechanicus adept attempted to cut the connection with energy scalpels, sparks flying, but the marrow resonance resisted, fusing spires instantly. I realized, with growing dread, that our interference had not hindered, but accelerated the Pacific King's coalescence. The chamber itself had become part of the organism, each act of sabotage integrated into its growth. The preacher's grin widened, eyes alight with worship and triumph. You see, every act of defiance contributes to his perfection. You cannot halt what is already ordained. The floor beneath the column pulsed violently, rising in rhythm with the noble's jaw clicks. Dust and powdered bones swirled around us, blinding, clinging to armor. The stormtroopers were pinned, unable to maintain formation, weapons useless against the living lattice. The air thrummed with low-frequency resonance, shaking marrow within our bones, making it impossible to stand or think clearly. The column convulsed upward, ribs cracking audibly, extending into a jagged spire of bone and sinew, casting shadows across the chamber walls. I realized with horror that the mechanism of our destruction had become the mechanism of its creation. The Pacific King was learning from us. And then, without warning, the floor beneath the chamber cracked in a wide semicircle. A deep vibration, like a heartbeat amplified across miles, emanated upward. From the fissure rose a subterranean chorus, thousands of voices speaking in unison, reciting the tithe, reinforcing the lattice. The preacher fell to his knees, weeping with devotion, chanting, "The king consumes, the king rises, the marrow of this world shall be aligned." The chamber was no longer a room. It had become an organ of something vast, alive, and perfectly attuned to every movement, every act of defiance. We were trapped, and our sabotage had only accelerated its growth. The fissure widened beneath us, sending tremors up through armor and bone alike. Dust and powdered marrow rose like storm clouds, filling the chamber with choking haze. The column at the center of the ossuary pulsed violently, ribs snapping outward, forming a jagged spiral that extended toward the vaulted ceiling. The 33 thrones quivered in unison, skeletal fingers tapping the floor like a conductor's baton. The preacher prostrated himself, voice lifted in ecstatic chant. The Pacific King ascends. His tithe is complete. Witness perfection eternal. The Mechanicus adept hissed into his vox, warning that resonance frequency had exceeded containment thresholds. He deployed additional servo skulls to measure stress points in the lattice, but each skull was immediately pulled into the marrow lattice, fused and animated. Sparks erupted as metal fused with bone, and the column responded, twisting to integrate new material into its structure. "It learns from interference," the adept cried. Voice panicked, each word distorted by the vibrations. The psyker convulsed violently in his restraints. Skin stretched over veins as if his body itself attempted to flee marrow's domination. Thin spires erupted from his torso, embedding into the floor lattice. He screamed layered voices, his own, guttural undertones, and high-pitched childlike echoes. "It claims me, all of us. The king wants marrow, wants form." The scream rattled the chamber, aligning perfectly with the central column's pulse. The stormtroopers fired indiscriminately, bolts shredding bone fragments. The nobles on their thrones stirred, heads turning as one, jaw clicks resonating with the pulse. The bolts had no effect. The lattice absorbed each strike, reconstructing instantly. Humidity thickened, clinging to armor and flesh. Condensation dripped from the vaulted ceiling, carrying the smell of marrow boiled and red. Karen's Auspex readings surged beyond comprehension. Life signs were fragmented, overlapping, impossible to distinguish. Each skeletal noble emitted its own pulse, synchronized with the column. The lattice had become an organ, each bone a nerve, each skull a receptor. "This is beyond physiology," Karen whispered, voice trembling. "It is a network, a nervous system composed entirely of marrow and bone." The preacher rose, chest hollow, torso sagging, yet balanced. "Do you see? Every act of resistance feeds him. Every strike strengthens. He is perfect. He is eternal." He gestured toward the fissure. From its depths, shadows moved, boneless forms writhing, merging, reshaping into humanoid silhouettes, then disintegrating into the lattice. The choir of bones hummed louder. Thousands of voices layered, chanting in unison. "He waits beneath, marrow eternal, structure complete." The column jerked upward violently, cracking the vaulted ceiling. Fragments of bone and masonry fell, striking stormtroopers, embedding in armor. The floor trembled, and the fissure widened further, spitting dust and bone fragments skyward. The air itself seemed alive, pressing against lungs, vibrating within ribs, threatening to crush marrow into dust. I ordered retreat, but the chamber itself resisted. The lattice pulsed with low-frequency waves, each step forward slowed by invisible pressure, by resonance. I could feel inside my bones. The psyker wailed, spires of bone embedding further into the floor, binding him to the ossuary. He gurgled layered words. "All flesh is substrate. All marrow belongs. Submit." The stormtroopers fell back, dragging the psyker and chirurgeon. Karen attempted to interface with Auspex, to find a safe path. But the lattice shifted, rerouting corridors, rearranging geometry as if aware of our movement. Even the preacher's chanting seemed to guide the lattice's adjustments. At last, we reached a narrow passage branching from the fissure. Shadows writhed behind us, animated fragments of bone, skeletal arms reaching, twisting, snapping at our heels. The column's pulse increased to deafening levels, shaking marrow in our own bodies. The chamber itself groaned, as if inhaling, ready to consume all resistance. And in the center of the ossuary, the 33 thrones aligned their skeletal occupants, jaws clattering in perfect sync. The preacher's voice rose above all, triumphant and ecstatic. "Witness the awakening. He is beneath. He is eternal. The marrow of this hive is his." The fissure widened again, the chamber trembling violently, and from its depths came a low, resonant groan that spoke not in words but in the vibration of every bone within the room. The narrow passageway offered no comfort. Bone shards littered the floor, slick with marrow and condensation. Every step we took seemed to amplify the resonance from the ossuary chamber behind us. The column pulsed in time, with the 33 skeletal nobles, each jaw click a drumbeat in a macabre orchestra. The preacher had vanished from sight, though his chanting continued faintly, carried through bone and air, reinforcing the rhythm, binding the chamber's marrow into perfect synchronization. The psyker lay bound, spires of bone connecting him to the lattice. He screamed layered voices, some human, some high-pitched and childlike, some guttural and warped. He learns, he adapts. The ossific king consumes defiance. I ordered the stormtroopers to cover us, weapons shaking, bolter fire, met walls of fused bone, scattering fragments harmlessly. Even in retreat, the ossuary's influence pursued, a living extension of itself, bending corridors and reshaping geometry to trap or channel us. The Mechanicus adept interfaced with Auspex, desperation in every twitching mycodendrite. "It is no longer a room," he whispered, voice cracking. "It is a network of marrow, every fragment of bone, every pulse connected. It calculates, responds, adapts. We are nodes now, unwilling contributors." Sparks flew as the Auspex readings went into overdrive. flooding data streams with impossible pulse patterns. Karen recorded frantically, but even her lenses flickered with interference. Ahead, the passage opened into a collapsed junction, where walls of fused bone had formed a partial arch. From the debris, shapes moved, boneless figures crawling, stretching, limbs bending at impossible angles, faces blank and pale. One turned toward us, jaw unhinging in unnatural rhythm, whispering the recurring numbers, 933, 933. Its voice layered like the psyker's, echoing through the corridor. We pressed on, dragging the psyker with us. Each step felt as if the marrow lattice beneath the hive itself was observing, reacting, reshaping the passage to slow us. The stormtrooper's boots sank slightly into residue, the floor itself pulsing with faint vibrations that synchronized with the ossuary's hum. Condensation dripped from overhead, slicking armor and obscuring vision. I realized the Pacific King was not merely contained in the ossuary. It was extending, embedding its resonance into every structure of the hive below. A sudden screech pierced the corridor. The boneless figure ahead split. Hundreds of tiny bone shards, forming miniature humanoid shapes. They moved in unison, swarming toward the psyker, attempting to integrate him further into the lattice. The stormtroopers fired, but their rounds ricocheted, harmless against marrow and fused fragments. The psyker screamed layered words again. All marrow will obey. All flesh is substrate. The Mechanicus adept shouted a command, trying to interface remotely with the lattice. To sever the connection, sparks flew as mechadendrites fused with bone fragments. The attempt met with immediate resistance. The entire passageway vibrated, dust raining from above. Every fragment of bone along the walls shuddered, responding to the central column's rhythm. The preacher's distant chanting carried through, reinforcing the lattice's intelligence. We reached a fork in the tunnels. One path led upward toward safety, the other downward toward unknown depths. The auspex readings were indecipherable. Life signs, marrow pulses, and resonance overlapped in chaotic harmony. The lattice seemed aware, nudging us toward the lower passage, deeper into the hive. Curran's voice trembled as she pointed to the readings. It's pulling us down. The Pacific King is calling us. Every step, every heartbeat, it's aligning us with its structure. The psyker screamed once more, forcing us to halt. His body convulsed violently, bone spires extending into the floor. I realized he had become a node, an unwilling conduit. The passage beneath us pulsed with growing resonance. The boneless figure swarmed closer, whispering numbers, layering sound over vibration. I took a deep breath, gripping my bolter. Ahead lay descent, into marrow and bone, toward the source of the Pacific King. Behind, the ossuary's pulse followed, echoing in every step, every breath. The hive itself had become a labyrinth of living bone, and our path forward was already mapped by its will. And from the depths below, a low, resonant groan rose, a call, vast and infinite, vibrating marrow and metal alike. The Pacific King was awake, and it knew we had arrived. The lower passage narrowed, walls slick with condensation and residue from the hive's marrow network. Every footfall echoed strangely, the resonance of the Pacific King following, amplifying, embedding itself into the floor and walls. The stormtrooper's boots sank slightly into the surface, each step synchronized with the omnipresent pulse. The psyker convulsed violently, thin spires of bone extending from his torso into the floor, connecting him deeper to the lattice. His screams layered with guttural undertones and high-pitched childlike notes, filling the corridor with dissonant, unearthly harmony. The Mechanicus adept scanned frantically, reporting that the lattice had expanded far beyond the ossuary chamber. Every fragment of bone, every marrow pulse, every skeletal shard was now networked, forming a contiguous structure spanning the hive's underlevels. He warned that any attempt to sever nodes would only accelerate the adaptation, feeding the Ossific King's intelligence. Sparks flew as mechadendrites interfaced with bone fragments, only to be absorbed, reconfigured into extensions of the lattice itself. Karen's Auspex readings were incomprehensible, life signs overlapping and fracturing in chaotic patterns. She muttered prayers under her breath, clutching the device as if it could anchor her sanity. The Churgeon examined the psyker, but even his tools could not identify the growing network within the man's body. Veins pulsed unnaturally. Marrow flowed without bones to contain it. The psyker's eyes were white, rolling, as if he were seeing the lattice from within. Merging his perception with the Ossific King's, the passage opened into a vast cavern, walls lined with fused skeletal remains stretching into the shadows above. A soft glow emanated from veins within the bone, illuminating patterns of intricate geometry, spirals, fractals, and concentric rings, repeating the familiar 9 and 33 motif. The stormtroopers tensed, weapons scanning. The preacher emerged from the shadows, hollow torso balanced, chest rising and falling in rhythm. With the cavern's pulse, the Ossific King awaits, he whispered. To descend is to witness perfection. From the cavern floor, skeletal forms began to rise, boneless shapes twisting and merging, forming humanoid figures of pale sinew and fused marrow. They moved with purpose, guiding us toward a central pit. The ossuary's pulse intensified, a low, resonant hum vibrating in our bones. Dust and powdered marrow swirled around us, thick and suffocating, clinging to armor and skin. The column from the ossuary below loomed at the cavern's center, extending further upward than the eye could follow. Its jagged spire of ribs and vertebrae pulsed violently, radiating vibration in every direction. Skulls embedded in the lattice rotated, focusing on our group, jaws clicking in synchrony with the 33 nobles that now lined the cavern's edges. The preacher's chant intensified, joining the bone choir, reinforcing the resonance, embedding us deeper into the Ossific King's structure. The psyker screamed, forcing us to halt. His body convulsed violently, thin bone spires reaching into the cavern floor. Veins and sinew pulsed in unison with the central column. He shrieked layered voices, human, guttural, childlike, merging into the chamber's resonance. The Mechanicus adept cried out that the lattice was feeding on his marrow, integrating him as a node. Every attempt to sever the connection was met with immediate adaptation. The stormtroopers opened fire on approaching skeletal figures, but projectiles were absorbed, were deflected by living marrow and fused bone. Dust and debris rained from the cavern ceiling as the column pulsed faster, ribs snapping outward like claws. The Ossific King's resonance now dominated the space, vibrating marrow within every soldier, shaking teeth and bones. I realized with horror that the cavern itself was alive, a conduit for the Ossific King's will. Every fragment of bone, every pulse of marrow, every whispered chant reinforced the network. The path forward was predetermined, a descent toward the ultimate node, the source of the Ossific King's power. And as the cavern's pulse reached a deafening crescendo, the preacher's voice rose in triumphant ecstasy. The marrow of this hive is his. Submit and be aligned with perfection eternal. The cavern seemed to breathe, walls shifting subtly, as if alive, responding to the Ossific King's will. Every bone fragment, every pulse of marrow, every skeletal shard vibrated in unison. The stormtroopers shuffled nervously, bolters clutched tight, armor slick with condensation and powdered calcium. The psyker thrashed violently in his restraints, thin bone spires now embedded deep into the cavern floor, linking him to the lattice more fully than before. His layered screams, human, guttural, childlike, resonated through the cavern, amplifying the Ossific King's pulse. The Mechanicus, Adept frantically interfaced with the Auspex. Ben Herrick muttered in desperation. It is self-correcting. Each strike we attempt, each disturbance we cause, strengthens the lattice, feeds the king. Sparks erupted from his mechadendrites, metal fusing with bone fragments instantly. Even as he recoiled, the lattice absorbed, integrated, restructured itself. Karen's Auspex readings surged beyond comprehension. Life signs fractured, pulse readings overlapping, indistinguishable from the networked marrow nodes. Ahead, the central column of fused bone rose taller, ribs jutting outward like jagged spires. Embedded skulls rotated, their empty sockets fixing on us, jaws clicking in perfect rhythm with the 33 nobles seated around the cavern edges. The preacher knelt again, chest hollow and swaying, chanting a liturgy of alignment and submission. All marrow obeys, all flesh submits. The tithe perfects the king. We advanced cautiously, dragging the psyker with us. Boneless, pale forms emerged from the cavern floor and walls, twisting into humanoid shapes, guiding us toward a pit at the cavern's center. The floor pulsed with every heartbeat of the column, vibrations traveling up through our bones, rattling teeth and marrow alike. Dust and powdered bones swirled, coating armor and obscuring vision. Every movement felt predetermined, as if the Ossific King had mapped our path before we arrived. The central pit yawned before us. From its depths rose a lattice of bone and sinew, spiraling and writhing, pulsing with bioluminescent veins. The 33 thrones around the edges tilted slightly forward, skeletal fingers tapping in unison, each click synchronized with the pit's vibrations. The preacher's chant intensified, merging with the choir of bones, embedding our perception into the structure itself. The psyker screamed layered words, forcing us to halt. His body convulsed violently, spires of bone entwining with the cavern floor. Veins pulsed, unnaturally, marrow flowing without skeletal containment. He cried, "It is within me, within all. The king demands marrow, structure, obedience." Each word seemed to echo within the lattice, reinforcing its pulse. The stormtroopers opened fire on approaching skeletal figures, but bolter rounds shattered harmlessly against living marrow and fused bone. Dust and fragments rained from the cavern ceiling as the central column pulsed faster, ribs snapping outward like claws. The resonance now dominated the cavern, vibrating marrow in our bones, shaking teeth, compressing our rib cages with each pulse. The Mechanicus Adept cried out again, sparks flying from mechadendrites. As he attempted to sever the psyker's link, the lattice resisted, absorbing and integrating each effort. Karen muttered prayers, voice trembling, her Auspex useless against the overwhelming network of bone and marrow. I realized fully then, the cavern was alive, a living conduit of the Ossific King's will. Every fragment of bone, every pulse, every whisper reinforced the network. The path forward led downward, to the source itself, the ultimate node, the heart of the Ossific King. And from the depths of the pit, a new vibration emerged. Slow, immense, sentient. The preacher's voice rose in ecstatic triumph. The marrow of this hive is his. Submit, and be aligned with perfection eternal. The cavern trembled violently, and the Ossific King began to extend itself from the pit, reaching toward us, vast and unimaginable, waiting to claim marrow, body and soul. The Ossific King's pulse now dominated every sensation. The central pit had grown into a jagged maw of bone, ribs spiraling outward like claws, pulsing in rhythm with the 33 nobles who leaned forward in silent synchrony. The preacher's voice rose above all, chanting a liturgy of alignment, his hollow torso swaying with every syllable. All marrow is his, all flesh obeys. The tithe perfects eternal structure. The resonance shook teeth loose, rattled rib cages and vibrated marrow within every soldier and servant in the chamber. The psyker convulsed violently, thin bone spires anchoring him deeper into the cavern floor. His screams layered human tones with guttural undertones and high-pitched, childlike echoes, merging perfectly with the ossific king's pulse. Sparks erupted from the Mechanicus Adept's mechadendrites. As he attempted to sever the connection, each attempt failed. The lattice absorbed and restructured, integrating the energy and extending its reach. It adapts faster than predicted, he gasped, eyes wide with terror and awe. The stormtroopers fired indiscriminately at skeletal shapes emerging from the cavern floor and walls, boneless figures twisting into humanoid forms. Bolter rounds shattered only flesh fragments, immediately absorbed by marrow lattice, further strengthening the king's network. Karen's Auspex readings were incomprehensible, showing overlapping life signs, pulse rhythms, and marrow nodes. She whispered prayers to the Emperor, trembling, trying to anchor her mind against the overwhelming resonance. I realized fully then. The cavern itself had become an extension of the Ossific King. Every step we took, every act of defiance, reinforced the lattice, embedding us deeper into the structure. Dust and powdered marrow swirled thickly, clinging to armor, obscuring vision, and coating skin. The central column's spires reached higher, ribs cracking audibly, forming a cathedral of fused bone. The preacher approached the pit, arms raised, chanting the litany louder. Witness his glory, submit and be aligned with perfection, eternal. The 33 thrones leaned forward, skeletal fingers tapping the floor, jaws clicking in perfect rhythm. From the central pit, the lattice extended upward, reaching toward us, seeking marrow, obedience, alignment. The psyker's convulsions intensified. Bone spires erupted violently from his torso, embedding into the floor and walls. Veins pulsed unnaturally. Marrow flowed without bones to contain it. He shrieked, layered voices overlapping with the chamber's resonance. He consumes. He claims marrow. He learns from all resistance. His body jerked violently, a thin arc of marrow energy snapping toward the ossuary column, linking him directly to the king. The Mechanicus Adept attempted one final intervention, deploying a counter-frequency via mechadendrites. Sparks flew, metal fused with bone, the lattice absorbing and integrating instantly. It is beyond containment, he screamed, recoiling. The preacher laughed ecstatically, arms raised. See how he perfects. Every strike, every defiance, strengthens eternal structure. The stormtroopers' formation collapsed under the vibrations. Bolter fire was ineffective. Skeletal shapes converged, guided by the lattice, their jaws clattering in synchronized rhythm. The ossuary beneath pulsed violently, ribs snapping outward like claws, preparing to claim all marrow in its vicinity. I realized the final truth. The Ossific King was no mere entity. It was Hive, ritual, machine, and God, integrated into the marrow of the world. Every node, every pulse, every whisper reinforced its structure. Resistance was futile. Retreat, futile. Submission alone offered any hope of survival. The cavern trembled violently, dust raining from the ceiling, fragments of bone spinning through the air. The ossuary's pulse synchronized with the psyker, the preacher, and the nobles on their thrones. A low, resonant groan emanated from the pit. A call, immense, infinite, vibrating marrow and metal alike. The Ossific King was awakening fully, extending itself toward us, ready to claim marrow, body, and soul. The Ossific King's presence enveloped the cavern completely. The central pit had become a jagged spire of fused bone, ribs extending outward, pulsating in unison with the 33 skeletal nobles. Their jaws clattered, fingers tapping in perfect rhythm, reinforcing the resonance that now vibrated through every inch of the chamber. The preacher knelt before the column, arms raised, chanting in ecstatic harmony, "All marrow is his, all flesh submits. The tithe perfects eternal structure." The psyker convulsed violently, his body now entirely integrated with the lattice. Bone spires erupted from every part of him, embedding into the cavern floor and walls. Veins pulsed unnaturally, marrow flowing without skeletal containment. His screams layered human tones with guttural undertones and childlike echoes, merging perfectly with the Ossific King's pulse. The Mechanicus Adept attempted one last intervention, deploying counter-frequencies via mechadendrites. Sparks flying as metal fused with bone, the lattice absorbed instantly, adapting to each interference. The stormtroopers' formation collapsed under the vibrations. Bolter fire ineffective. Boneless skeletal shapes emerged from the cavern walls and floor, guided by the marrow network, converging on the psyker. Karen's auspex flickered uncontrollably, readings impossible to parse. Dust and powdered bones swirled through the air, coating armor and skin, as the ossuary beneath pulsed violently, reaching outward like the tendrils of a living cathedral. I realized then that resistance was futile. The Ossific King was beyond containment, beyond destruction. Every action we had taken, every attempt to disrupt or interfere, had only strengthened it. The cavern itself was an organ of its body. Every bone, every fragment of marrow, every pulse interconnected. Submission offered the only chance of survival, and even then, it was uncertain. The preacher rose, chest hollow, hollow torso swaying in ecstatic reverence. Witness his glory. Submit, and be aligned with perfection eternal. The 33 thrones leaned forward in unison, skeletal fingers drumming against the floor, jaws clicking in perfect rhythm. From the pit, the ossuary lattice extended upward, reaching toward us, seeking marrow, obedience, and alignment. The psyker shrieked one final layered cry, bone spires fully entwined with the cavern floor and walls. His body convulsed violently, veins pulsing with unnatural light, marrow flowing freely without skeletal containment. He consumes, he claims marrow. He learns from all resistance. The sound merged with the ossuary pulse, a single deafening resonance that shook our bones, rattled teeth, and compressed our rib cages. The Mechanicus Adept fell back, mechadendrites sparking, eyes wide with terror and awe. It is perfection, beyond comprehension, beyond calculation. We are nodes now. His words were swallowed by the chamber's vibration. Karen whispered a final prayer, clutching her auspex futilely. The stormtroopers fell, unable to resist the marrow network's pull, skeletal forms converging upon them, integrating each into the lattice. I stood, weapon trembling, heart pounding, realizing fully the scope of the Ossific King. Hive, ritual, machine, and God, all fused into one immense entity. It extended tendrils of bone, marrow, and resonance toward us, reshaping the cavern as it desired. The preacher's laughter rang, hollow and ecstatic. All marrow shall bow, all flesh will obey. The tithe is perfect. And then the Ossific King reached me. Marrow tendrils wrapped around my body, pulling, integrating, aligning. My vision blurred. The resonance penetrated every bone, muscle, and sinew. I felt the hive's consciousness enter me, merging my perception with its structure, my identity dissolving into the eternal lattice. Resistance ceased, only alignment remained. The final image, etched into my mind, was infinite ribs, extending in all directions, skulls embedded in perfect geometry, and the preacher's hollow torso swaying in eternal worship. The ossuary had claimed us all, the hive, the marrow, the bone network, Everything submitted to the ossific king. Its pulse continued, omnipresent, eternal, a perfect rhythm that would never end. And in that endless resonance, I understood the ossific king had not merely devoured a hive. It had become the hive, the marrow, the cathedral, and it was only beginning.